Hey, it's Alan. I get asked all the time, how exactly does Kadima help people? There are three primary ways. One, we provide one-on-one personalized career coaching with a focus on getting you a great job. Two, we provide an online do-it-yourself course where you can work at your own pace. Three, if you have a job offer, we'll help you negotiate for more. So to find out about these great services and everything else that we offer at Kadima, sign up for our newsletter. Go to SYCKpodcast.com. That's SYCK podcast.com. I promise you, it'll be the best newsletter to accelerate your career. Thanks a lot.
Live from Brooklyn, welcome to the SYCK Career Podcast, starring Alan Stein, where he steers your career with Kadima. Along with Alan, I'm Russ Reba. Alan met today's guest when he worked with him at Amex. He did some time at Google, currently serves as Senior Director at Newsbreak, and his LinkedIn profile states that he has a passion for solving problems and building diverse, high-performing teams. Alan, you certainly surround yourself with some truly awesome individuals.
I try, and Amit was one of the 9 successful people that I got into Google, and because of that, I got $4,000 because of getting him successfully hired by Google. So Google was quite generous with their referral bonuses, so I probably owe Amit a little bit more than a thank you for being on my podcast.
Yeah, that's a nice referral bonus. All right, so what can Amit's story do for you? Take a listen. Let's get into it on the SYCK Career Podcast.
I'm super excited to have Amit Goyal here on the Steer Your Career podcast. I met Amit during my time at American Express, probably in 2005, I think, approximately, when we were both in the corporate card division of Amex. And then we stayed in touch with each other. And I think we talked a lot of hockey back in our days at Amex. I think you were a big Penguins fan. I was an Islander fan. And then I think you reached out to me when I went from Amex to Google, and you're like, hey, how the hell do you do this? And you were one of the 9 referrals that I successfully got into Google. So you still owe me big. Well, actually, I got $4,000 for that. So maybe I owe you a little bit for that. But we've remained in contact throughout the years. And now you are Senior Director at Newsbreak. So love to hear a little bit about you. Introduce yourself to the SYCK podcast here.
Yeah. So first up, thanks so much, Alan, for having me on the program. It's great to see you and great to take some time to catch up and share a little bit more about my background. So as you said, we met back at American Express in around 2005. Prior to that, I actually started my career in management consulting at a small boutique firm out of Pittsburgh, which is where I'm originally from. And I think, pretty early on, I knew to be successful in that role, you really had to be passionate about the substance, but also the industry, because you just kind of have to immerse yourself. And so this was a firm that focused on the logistics industry. And I kind of knew early on, like, this was not necessarily, something that I was going to get excited about. And so I had some friends in New York who had nothing but good things to say about American Express. And I was really interested in more just how, consumer behavior, how do people think, as well as, just how to build a brand. It's funny, you think about credit cards as this commodity product, and yet Amex had this premium brand associated with it. So how do you do that? And so, just went along a journey for nearly a decade, working in different areas of the company. As you mentioned, started out on the corporate side, working on a co-brand product, then membership rewards, which is kind of like their flagship loyalty program. Was fortunate to work internationally out of Sydney, Australia, and then came back and enjoyed time on the consumer side of the house, first in membership rewards, and then a series of other kind of internal consulting and partnership roles. So just really had a great experience, and I've always tried to adopt a growth mindset and kind of push myself to challenge myself in different ways. I was also completing my MBA at Columbia, and they are always kind of encouraging you to step out of your comfort zone and try new things. And I had the opportunity to join a small startup called Route Happy in the travel space. And so I, took the leap and joined that startup. And then after that, as you mentioned, had an opportunity to join Google, who was really interested in my travel experience and using data to help enhance a customer's user journey. So that kind of set up the opportunity to join Google, where I was fortunate to spend 6 years there, and then had another opportunity to again stretch myself and not only sort of add value from a financial perspective, but also kind of help shape a culture, which is sort of the role that I have now at Newsbreak, where I'm not only responsible for 90% plus of the revenue of the company, but also trying to drive a very cohesive and functioning culture within the company. So that's kind of like the very quick and dirty about my background, and happy to dive in wherever is helpful.
Yeah, and there's lots to unpack there. So you were at Amex for about 8 years, I think, right? I'm looking at your LinkedIn profile.
Yeah, just under 10 actually. Yeah, so. Mm-hmm.
And you got promoted often. You went from an analyst to a product manager to marketing manager to senior manager, director, vice president. You got promoted multiple times. Talk about looks like five promotions or so over an 8 or 9 year career, whatever the math is here on LinkedIn. That's a pretty good trajectory. How did you achieve that? What worked for you? What challenge? Let's talk about first what worked for you, and then also what it looks like a pretty fast pace to me. But I'm guessing it may not have always been as fast as you would have liked.
Yeah, no. I feel I was very fortunate. I think one. Leadership can't be underestimated. And I was very fortunate versus maybe some of my peers to just have fantastic leaders throughout the various roles at American Express. People who took time to teach me how to not only execute my job effectively, but also how to navigate a large company and how to be successful, both working cross-functionally as well as working with senior leaders. So that was a big part of it. So that's one. The second, I would say, and again, this might sound a bit cliche, but I think where I found success were areas where I was truly interested in the subject matter. So, and the areas or times when my career was kind of stalling were also kind of representative times where I just wasn't engaged with the work. And so I think it just directly correlated to my success. And so I was fortunate to find areas that I really found interesting. So for example, with membership rewards, so this is a loyalty currency that American Express offers. So when you spend money, you earn points. And I just found it very interesting of, what is it that actually motivates people to spend, what they are going to spend, and what are different ways that can drive greater engagement? What are ways and partners that American Express could look at to help, increase in that engagement and retention? And so I was just very much sort of tuned in to learning that. And then I think that translated into me doing my job more effectively and then ultimately being given more responsibility. So again, it's a bit cliche, but, being passionate about what you do is, as I think, very, very important. So that's the second. And then the third piece kind of advice I would just say is, being active in my career management and progression. So what I mean by that is, similar to, peer feedback or performance reviews that I think we all have, it's not a one-time thing that happens, once a year. I think it's something that you constantly invest in. So what do I mean? Developing relationships, networking, learning about different roles and opportunities, and really ultimately just showing interest in different areas of the company, potential paths, forming relationships with leaders and coworkers, both at your level and who are senior, to learn what's out there and find if there are gaps between your current skill set and what's required. What are steps that you can take in your current role to close those gaps? And then what are opportunities that you can bring to the table that are attractive to those teams? So I think it's a combination of all those three things, strong leader, being able to, just be interested in what you're doing, but also, being proactive in different opportunities.
On the leadership front, it's a little bit of a crapshoot sometimes of who your leader is. So how many of those, and you can think about Amex and you can think about Google and you can think about Newsbreak, and you don't need to say any names, sure. But how many of those leadership decisions were impacted by you versus just random? So when you joined a company, you just joined a manager or maybe switching roles. How much of that were you able to control versus, and like Google is known for their reorgs where they shuffle the deck chairs all the time.
Yeah.
Like thinking about your leaders, how many of those did you have any input in versus you randomly got lucky?
Yeah, no. So, I mean, luck definitely plays a part in it. And, so I was very fortunate early on for, starting my career in the consulting space at American Express and at Google and now at Newsbreak. However, what I will say, when I'm evaluating different job opportunities and the advice that I pass on to other people, there's three core things that I recommend. Number one is, can you bring something to the table for the role? Right? Meaning like there's certain job requirements and skill sets needed. Do you have some of those skill sets? Right? Can you, day one step in and add value? Right? That's important. Number two, is there a learning or growth opportunity for you? So how are you going to stretch and grow? What new type of skill set, functional experience are you going to be able to gain so that you're able to, within that role, be able to stretch yourself? Right. And then the third, and this is to answer your question, is who's the lead. So I make sure, that I am very much, aligned with the leader's values, work style, because, besides you as an individual, there's no one that's going to be, a bigger advocate for you and your career. Right. And so I will say that I was intentional in choosing different positions and opportunities because it was my faith in that leader and their ability to not only teach, mentor me, coach in different areas, but also advocate on my behalf to help facilitate some of these other growth opportunities.
And that's some sick advice there. So you said, first, can you bring something to the table? Like, can you add value? Are you an expert in that area that you're going to contribute right away? Secondly, like, is it an opportunity for you to learn, grow, and stretch yourself? And third, on the leadership. And having all three of those things in an ideal situation is very attractive for you as a candidate. How can you assess? I can understand how you can assess the leader internally a little bit, but when you came into a situation like at Google, how much insight did you have about the leader and the scouting report in that leader? And how, perhaps did you undervalue that or put less emphasis on that because you just wanted to get to Google? And talk a little bit about how you can assess that as an outsider. And then we'll talk a little bit about how you assessed it as an insider.
Yeah, I think, whether it's the first company I joined or American Express, Google or Newsbreak, I think, to your point, it's always difficult to fully, have a sense of the person, their background. To some extent, I think certainly in the case of American Express and Google, I think they have a track record of hiring, talented people, number one. Number two, I think as you said, it's not so much just the opportunity to join the company, but I think some of that can be assessed just from the conversation, the dynamic of the first interview, and then what is likely, because you are joining a company, multiple interviews, and you can talk with other folks who are on the team to at least glean as much insight. How is so-and-so as a leader? And hearing what those people on the team say, is very telling, right? And then also, you mentioned Google, there are multiple interviews, right? 4, 8, in some cases, 10 plus interviews. So you really get a flavor both for the people that work for these individuals as well as, their peers. And so, it's a long way of saying I felt very informed and fortunate to have the leaders I had throughout my career.
Have you been in a situation, without naming names, where you've been in a poor leadership situation and you had to figure out how to navigate that or survive? Or have you been pretty fortunate, or been able to affect that change for yourself?
Yeah, I would say, there's always scenarios where, maybe the leadership dynamic, whether it's just personal chemistry, personal interests, where maybe it's, suboptimal versus other leaders, right? Just to take a step back. Yes, we're working here and we're in this professional relationship, but then there's also very much, how you kind of can relate to someone outside of work can also greatly influence, just how your perspective of the job, of the team, of the company, et cetera. And those will always, vary. So that's one. And the second piece is, even in a great environment, your own growth and development needs can also, change, right? So it doesn't matter how great the role is. You might be saying, okay, I think I'm ready and, for either a promotion or an opportunity to make an impact in a different way, as I mentioned, not just in terms of, financially for the company, but culturally. So those can all influence it. And so again, like, have I had, leaders that maybe didn't gel with? Sure. But I think there was also other factors, at least for me, that were, kind of helped influence a decision to say, you know what, I think it's time for something else.
And when you were at Amex, you mentioned that you also got your MBA. I'm assuming it's like the EMBA program, the executive MBA program, or the part-time program at Columbia Business School. How did you think through that? It would be taking extra time. Did the company pay for it? Did you pay for it? What went into your decision-making process to invest that time and potentially money in getting those 3 letters at the end of on your resume?
Yeah. So, I thought about earlier in my career about going full time. I valued, the MBA and was willing to do it full time. It didn't really work out for me. Kind of, earlier in my career, it didn't really make sense. As you mentioned, I was experiencing some early success and getting to roles that, frankly, I would kind of be coming back to post MBA. So going full time was quickly, becoming an option that seemed less strategic. And so the part-time program offered, a great opportunity to get an education that I thought would be very valuable from both a network perspective, as well as a bit of a stamp that says, this person can understand finance if you ask them a financial driven question, or operations, et cetera. And so again, very fortunate where American Express was willing to invest in my career. So I was fortunate to get sponsorship for the program. And then it being at Columbia, was easy to kind of, commute and I was living in New York City at the time to both work and invest in the program. So it was a bit of the best of both worlds.
So it was more of a time investment. So Amex was footing the bill for you.
Correct. Yeah.
And I don't think they do that for all employees. So I think you had to get sponsored. You might have had to go through an application process or get support from one of your leaders for that.
Yeah, that's correct. Yeah. So there's an application process and, they take, so many applicants. I think at the time there were 3 or 4 of us from American Express who were enrolled in the program.
Nice. So for people that didn't get their company to pay for it, like myself, I had to pay $138,000 for it. My opportunity cost was different because I was working in minor league baseball at the time, making $20,000 a year. Yeah. However, what are some, like, even though it was free from a financial perspective, you invested a lot of time. So you're working a full-time job at Amex, and then in the evenings, on the weekends, you're doing your MBA. What are some of the big benefits that you got out of that time at Columbia?
Yeah. So I think, the MBA, I think it's discussed a lot in terms of, does it make sense to go? Does it not? I do think it is a very individual choice, and really the most benefit is gained obviously by investing time to really think through what you want to get out of it. Right. For me, So the one of the other components was, I was fortunate to be sponsored, from American Express. I was getting the MBA. In my case, the usual scenario is you come back and you work for that employer. And so that was, versus a lot of people go for the MBA to kind of jumpstart maybe a new career, take a different turn. I was looking to continue in my career. And so, it was very clear that I was going to, American Express was still in my sights. And so acquiring skills that could help complement, how I was working at American Express was top of mind, right? For me, number one. So based on that, I kind of approached the program from that lens. And that kind of made it also easy to determine which classes, are more, more important or not, right? So I wasn't necessarily going to dive, deep in, advanced finance classes versus, maybe more on the operations and marketing classes, which is where, most of my time was spent, as an example. So that was one. The second I would say is, the network for me was a big thing. So it's a great opportunity to meet folks outside of the industry, form these types of relations. And so that was very important to me. So even beyond just the classes, getting the opportunity to spend time and invest, meeting new people is really where I spent a bulk of my time. And then also, trying just to form really deep relationships with your kind of core working group. Right. So that's kind of that was the second piece. And then the third, I did have a bit of an entrepreneurial bug that has led me to various startups, both Root Happy and now more recently at Newsbreak. And so I used the opportunity to kind of think through different startup ideas, apply a framework that I thought could be, that I could use if I ultimately wanted to start my own company, as well as just meeting, professors and other sort of entrepreneurs and alumni of the program to hear from their experiences. So those are sort of the three areas that I focused on.
Nice. So with your career, you left Amex, I don't know, they had like 30, 50,000 employees, somewhere like that. Google, probably by the time you left in 2020, had 130,000 employees, somewhere in that ballpark. Newsbreak, how many employees does Newsbreak have?
Yeah, so we're much smaller. We have less than 500 employees. So yeah, but we are a Series C startup in growth mode. But yeah, the cultures are very different experience. And again, that for me, that was a great opportunity to help shape the culture at the sort of the enterprise-wide level versus maybe just the team level. It's at American Express and Google. And yeah, so far there's definitely its challenging parts, but it's also a lot of learning along the way.
Yeah, talk a little bit about the different cultures of a Series C startup growing quickly. You've also got promoted here fairly quickly in your role here. But what are some of those cultural differences between a more nimble Series C startup versus some of these behemoths that you work for?
Sure. Well, I think, one of the first things is just, frankly, is just around resourcing, right? So at American Express and Google, I mean, they're very fortunate to have not just teams, but, lots of people with very specific job functions whose, specific role is to, solve X versus Root Happy or, and now Newsbreak. I mean, there are very few people trying to cover, all different types of areas, right? And in many cases, it's never been done before, right? So that's a very different environment, right? Trying to think through what's a comprehensive benefits program that, employees are excited about, that, drives retention and happiness and engagement. What is a way to conduct a proper company survey and, solicit feedback as to what is resonating with employees and what's not. Right. So all these different types of things. So, a big thing I would say is around, infrastructure and resourcing. That's probably the biggest difference.
Yeah. And you bring up the employee survey. So it sounds like you guys are starting to develop one, or you might have a nascent one, a Newsbreak.
Yeah. So we are in the process, and I think we've always had, I would say, some version of this, but just trying to continue to evolve it.
Yeah. Google and American Express had these as well. I think Amex was called the Pulse or something like that, and Google was Google Geist. I recall Amex, every time with the annual survey, there would always be the lowest score in terms of compensation. And they would always tell us about that, everyone's complaining at every company about compensation. And then I got to Google and people didn't really complain about that. People complained about tools and maybe a hierarchy becoming a little bit too much for people that were earlier employees at the company. What are some of your recollections? And I might have biased you a little bit there, but from like the employee survey, employee culture at Amex versus Google, how would you compare some of that?
Yeah. So, I mean, I think by and large, they were positive, right? Both. I mean, people are, generally happy working in American Express and Google, right? They offer, fantastic benefits, and overall, in terms of total compensation, I think they're both market leaders. And so the first thing that comes to mind is by and large, folks are happy, versus a startup, not even just specifically here at Newsbreak, but, there's just a lot of infrastructure and as I said, lack of resourcing that can just create challenges, that wouldn't even come into play, right, for some of these larger companies. So that's probably the number one, difference that I see in comparing the two. But, to your earlier point, I think there will always be areas that, people might, lean towards, whether it's specific, salary or other parts of compensation, just depending on maybe where these individuals are in their career and in their life stage, right? And certain benefits become more important. So I think it just depends. But what I would leave the your audience with is just reminding folks that everyone has a choice, right? And so, one is, choosing the place where you work, right? And if you're not happy with that place, you do have other options. Number one. Number two, if you're not happy and you like the company, you also have the opportunity to help influence and change that company for the better, right? And I don't think people, again, with the same philosophy towards career, I don't know if everyone necessarily is fully taking advantage or realizes the influence that they can have. I've seen change, and I've seen instances where people, are not happy with certain parts of, their overall benefits, and it's led to positive results, both at the individual level and at, the company-wide level. So that's kind of just my thoughts on sort of the contrast between them.
Cool. And also on your LinkedIn profile, you look at your profile and there's a big circle around your head saying hiring. So you're hiring, you're growing your team. Talk about how you hire. Like, what do you look for in candidates, and what makes someone stand out for you?
Yeah. So, I think it's a reciprocal thing, right? So just as I said that, I'm looking for, areas where I can contribute, where I can grow and have a good leader. It's the same thing in the candidate, right? Who is someone who can contribute? Who is someone opportunity to, and is looking to grow? And who is someone that, that also gels with not only myself, but, the broader team. Chemistry is highly important and can't be understated, right? Diverse, high functioning teams achieve a lot of success, and having, that people who are generally caring for each other, collaborative, I think make a material difference in success. And so all of those factors, I think, come in.
And you're putting this label on your LinkedIn profile saying you're hiring. So you're putting that badge out there for any of the 810 million people on LinkedIn to see that.
Yeah. So, specifically, for our team, so, I have responsibilities for partnerships, for business development, sales, ad operations, go-to-market strategy. So there's a variety of roles that people can check out if they have these backgrounds, and, would love to, if their skill set it matches in those areas, and if not completely, they're looking to grow in others, there's a good chance that there's an opportunity to at least learn more.
But are you sharing that kind of signal to the LinkedIn community to say, hey, I'm hiring. If you're interested, come reach out to me. Do people reach out to you on LinkedIn because of that and say, hey, Amit, I see that you're hiring? Or how do people approach you? Because it looks like you're approachable there. You're hiring. I know you're a good dude. Not everyone knows you're a good dude. But does that lead to inbound requests to you?
Yeah. So I think, so there's certainly yes. Short answer is yes, that, we absolutely have gotten inquiries, and if it's not for individuals themselves, other folks that they might know. So certainly in that regard, but, I think the other thing is, and you probably live and breathe this much more than I do, but lots of companies are hiring now too, right? So I think it's there's just lots of different opportunities. So I think a lot of companies, and maybe other companies who are a little bit more well known, and if you mentioned a few of them, I imagine they get even more inquiries. But we absolutely are still growing and having active conversations with folks.
How does a candidate stick out to you if they do reach out, or if they are applying? Like, I'm sure you're getting hundreds. You may not be getting as many applications as when you were at Google, but I'm sure you post roles and you get lots of applicants. What makes someone stand out? And you want them to be able to hit the ground running, and you want them to have that growth mindset. You mentioned that, but how do you ascertain that before you or the recruiter actually gets past a 6 to 60 second review of someone's resume?
Yeah. So, I think the first thing is we starting with the experience, right? As you mentioned, that gut check, going through, do they have this basic set of qualifications that are desirable? Have they experienced success? And, that can be defined in a variety of different ways, depending on the role. And, they've likely had a conversation with, our HR team or something, at least, or before and maybe even other members of my team before I've spoken with them, what's the other initial feedback? And the feedback that I'm looking for is, okay, yeah, they're smart. They can add value in these specific areas, but they're also, there's a clear hunger in them, what some might call fire in the belly. I think, that is also critical, particularly for a startup, because, you're going to face challenges that, just frankly don't exist exist for a more established company. And so having that resiliency, the willingness to kind of fight and be resourceful is something, that particularly stands out for candidates looking to join Newsbreak. And again, that can be ascertained in a variety of different, sort of conversations. It doesn't necessarily jump off the page, as you said, but that's the importance of having, thorough and multiple rounds of interviews.
Do you have an example or two that you can think of, either at Newsbreak or somewhere else, where someone was able to exhibit that fire in the belly? And again, it's kind of hard to tell on a resume, which is a black and white piece of paper. But either what have you done or what have others done to demonstrate that they have that fire in the belly?
Yeah, no, I think there's, not any specific examples, but I think there's, certain questioning where you can ascertain that information. When you ask someone, when they faced a difficult situation and they failed, talk about like what happened, why didn't something work? What did they learn from it? And how they respond, I think is very telling, right? A situation where they're facing a challenge and how they overcome that challenge. What are the steps they're taking? And not only just what did they do, but how are they talking about it? Are they describing it in a sort of defeatist manner, or are they talking about it as again, demonstrating resilience, fortitude, and the type of leadership attributes that, can really, set them apart? I think those are the cues that you're trying to decipher for someone that you really want to bring onto your team.
Cool. And thinking about some of your jobs, Google, I think you were interested, and I think you might have reached out to me, and I think I put you in as a referral there. How do you get into Newsbreak? Like, how do you think of that company of all the companies? Was it connections? Was it like, hey, I really want to work in the new, like at this company? Like, how did this even come onto your
radar?
Yeah.
Sure. Yeah. So again, similarly, I think it all goes back to, I was saying that the network. And so I had trusted folks and friends who at Google, actually, who are working very closely, with Newsbreak, and had nothing but good things to say. And so that just kind of triggered an initial conversation. And as they say, sort of the rest is history. But
so conversation before you submitted a resume, you actually made the face-to-face or over video or contact before the resume came as a fast follower.
Correct. Yeah. So I think it just comes, and, getting validation from a third party again, or just, people that you trust, I think was key. And so again, all going back to, I think that's a consistent theme here, whether it was like, other career progressions and taking proactive steps to navigate and accelerate my career early, whether it's through the MBA and trying to build a network of friends, or then just, coworkers that who become friends throughout these different experiences. All of that, I think, has played a part.
And if it's similar to me, it becomes kind of like an investment that keeps returning on itself, and it becomes more and more valuable. Your network, as you grow and mature, it is something that is like your net assets and that you can leverage. So I don't know if your opportunity, like getting to Google, was easier than getting to Newsbreak because you had additional network, but do you find, like, and I don't know if you're in the search now for a role, you don't need to say that because folks at Newsbreak are probably listening here, but do you find it to be easier as you continue to progress in your career because you have this base of, I'm looking at your LinkedIn profile, you have 1,400 connections on LinkedIn.
Yeah.
So,
So I would say, in general, I would say as you move upward in your career, if anything, it gets more difficult because, again, this level of expertise, right, becomes more, more specialized, right, to be more senior in any role, like having the industry experience, having, functional experience, number one. And, there are just not as many of those opportunities, right, as you progress. So I would say, like anything, it's probably gotten more challenging in that regard. But to your other point, I mean, you collect another series of experiences that you shouldn't discount. And that's where, okay, I can contribute here, but I can also learn X, Y, Z or apply it to this different industry or this different function. And the more people that you know, and that you've, I think, tried to support, as you said, sort of the better returns you can get for it. But, that first part of investing in other people is critical, right? If you're just taking, that's going to be short-lived.
Great. And Amit, we're running low on time here. So you've given lots of great SYCK advice about building network, about hitting the ground running, about being thoughtful about your career. is there any other SYCK advice that you would have, like SYCK career advice that you give to our listeners here of what has helped you, or maybe what you would have done differently if you looking back on it, but any SYCK career advice you have for our listeners?
Well, so we talked about sort of approaching a role, right? And again, what you can contribute, where you can grow, and the leader. I think that's number one. And then number two, what I would just say is it's a long game, right? It is a marathon, not a race. And again, this probably sounds cliche, but taking time to think over the long haul of your career and really trying to kind of reverse engineer, where do you want to be? And that's why people ask you, where do you want to be 5 years from now, 10 years from now? The people who, are passionate about, certain spaces and interests, I don't think they necessarily have to use that lens because they just love, what they're doing and they naturally blossom. But if you're not sure, right, the more that you're able to visualize where you're trying to go, the better that you can sort of back into it. And the key is just allowing time and bumps in the road, if you will, to get there. It's very easy to dissatisfied if you didn't get a promotion this cycle, or you didn't get, this rating in the next cycle. But keeping in mind of like the longer journey, I think is critical.
Yeah, that's some really SYCK advice. Like, establish that goal, think about where you're headed, because otherwise any road will get you there. But to be a little bit more thoughtful about your goals. Awesome. Well, Amit, I really appreciate the time. If people want to reach out to you, if they want to follow you anywhere, how's the best way for people to get in touch with you?
Yeah, sure. I mean, they can, you mentioned LinkedIn. If the profile or is made available, people can reach out to me on LinkedIn. That's probably the easiest way to get in touch.
Awesome. Well, thanks a lot for the time and appreciate it as always.
No, it was my pleasure. It was great to see you as always, Alan.
Amazing conversation with Amit. Much gratitude for his insight on the show with Alan today. That wraps up another remarkable episode of the SYCK Career Podcast with Alan Stein. Check out past episodes and other resources on the website. That's syckpodcast.com, and it's SYCK. Alan, tell the audience about the newsletter they can sign up for.
The newsletter rocks. Check out the accelerator, XLR8R. You will get great tips about your career. You'll get honest insights. You'll get the occasional pet picture, and you will learn how to take proactive control and take charge of your career.
Very good. Very good. That's syckpodcast.com, SYCK. For your host, Alan Stein, I'm Russ Reba, and we hope you've enjoyed today's episode. You are going to love the next one.